Meetup. Here we are discussing the stories from biblical series and each lecture every night. And tonight it's it's 10th lecture, and let's go in. And before we go in, I'd like to update our folks that we don't see Shrikant today because he is on vacation, and he will be back probably early next week. And we don't have Roger too because he's switching jobs, and he said he can't make it tonight. So it's those are two updates. And going in, what I'd like to do is I have a small presentation on the lecture. I'd like to present it, and right after that, Pegor will take over, and he will present his part. And right after that, we'll go into discussing what we all got from this lecture. So we will discuss what we got from the lecture, and right after that, we will go into breakout rooms. And in breakout rooms, we will discuss, given what we collected from what we got, we will formulate some questions, and then we go into breakout rooms, discuss those questions, and then come back, and we will do a lightning round where we collect all the important questions, interesting questions, and we answer each other. So that's how the format goes. So going up, I will make up my presentation. Give me a second, guys. Sorry about the delay. Right, I have it here. Hope everyone can see the presentation. So the title of this lecture is Abraham, the Father of Nations. So we'll be focusing on the story of Abraham, essentially. For my part, I'd like to focus on three main things, that is Noah's Ark and Abraham's covenant. So earlier to this, we discussed Noah's story, and I'd like to compare and contrast how the story proceeds from Noah to Abraham. And the second part is punctuations. Punctuations meaning, in the story of Abraham, there are different set of sub-stories, and between each sub-stories, there is something that happens. We'll discuss about that. And the third part is motivation. That part, Peterson discusses two main things that go into motivation. So those are the three things. Going forward. So we have seen this graph before. We have seen how the responsibility starts to change hands from the idea of God to the human itself. So that's how the progression of the story takes the responsibility slowly and carefully. And for tonight, we will especially focus on Noah and Abraham. And we know the story of Noah, where God appears to Noah and says, there is a flood coming, and you will have to build an ark. So that's, Noah abides to the order, and he goes in and he creates the ark, and at the end, the flood comes in, and because he obeyed God and he listened to whatever the voice that told him, eventually he gets saved, and he and his family. We know the story. And with Abraham, it's a little bit different. With Abraham, God appears, or the voice of the God talks to him, and he says, get out of your father's tent and get going. So that's the idea. To draw a contrast, in Noah's story, it was more of an order. And in Abraham's story, it was more of a contract. It was more of a promise. If you do this, you will get this. It was more of a friendly contract. And in the old story, we have a literal ark, literal ship that actually saves from the flood. And in the Abraham story, it was more of a covenant, that it is an unwritten bond between two people. And we usually do this in our own life, where we go into covenant, go into contract with either people or with our own ideal, that what we want to achieve. So that's the main difference between these two stories. And we see some development in human responsibility here. And Peterson says this is an increased psychologization of the same idea, the idea that there is a future and there is a better, if we do the things right, there is a better future going ahead. That's the idea. And we see how the responsibility is slowly changing hands, and the authority is going down from God. And next, let's discuss about the idea of punctuations. If we look at the story of Abraham, there are a set of stories throughout his life. There's the story of Lot, his nephew. He goes and he fights kings and comes back and gets his nephew back. And then there is a covenant between the idea of God and the human itself, Abraham, that he will become the father of nations. And then there is a story of Isaac and the sacrifice itself. And the stories go on. But between each of these stories, there is something that's specific that happens. That is sacrifice. Abraham, he goes, gets his nephew, and then he sacrifices something. And only then he goes to a new story. And Peterson mentions a particular thing about this particular episodes happening. We can relate to our own lives, where we move from one particular idea, we chase something promising, and once we run out of that, we don't know what to do next. And we can see this particular thing happening in our own life. I want to give an example, strictly a professional example. We all start off as students, and we join a college, and by the time we get to the degree, our job is to study well and get the degree. And once we get the degree, we have to get a job or move out and give the talents out. And for that, and then we can potentially go to a higher position, and then we start a business. So these are different episodes in our life. But for that to happen, let's look at just as a student. We cannot take the attitudes and behaviors of a student, and we cannot take all of these and get a job. For that, we have to shed something in our own life, and only then we can move to a new job. And the same thing happens in the job itself. If we want to stick at a simple position, we can stick. But if we want to move higher, we'll have to leave something off. And same thing happens if we go and start an enterprise. We will have to develop ourselves. That's the idea behind punctuations, meaning for us to move from one place to another place in our own life, we will have to shed something that is not needed and go forward. And elaborating on the same idea, what is learning? Learning, we can think that there is something that we don't know, and we go and learn something, and that is a part of learning. But Peterson says most important learning happens when we look at ourselves, we ask ourselves, where is it I'm going wrong? And we look at the things that we are going wrong and leave those things and then go forward. So that is a right kind of learning. And coming to commitment and doing a particular thing. If you want to aim at something big, and if you are going for it, the idea is commitment is doing a particular thing. But at the same time, there is an implicit definition in there. The implicit definition is when we are doing a particular thing, we are also leaving everything out. We are not doing everything else, and we are doing only one particular thing. So that is one way of describing the idea of sacrifice, like meaning leaving everything that is not needed and just doing the things that that is needed. So that's the idea of punctuation, commitment, and learning. And now moving on to motivation. Peterson gives a few examples, and he goes into some real life experiments that are being done. And before that, let's look at the definition of motivation itself. At the root of the word motivation is the word motive, which is similarly defined as a reason for a particular action. So keeping that in the back of the mind, let's discuss this one. Peterson gives this example of an experiment done by Jeffrey Gray. He's a neuropsychology, so he's a neuropsychologist, and he wrote a book called Neuropsychology of Anxiety. And Peterson says he read around 3,000 papers written on this subject, and he synthesized everything, and he wrote this book, and it's really tough to crack. Coming to the experiment, he says there was an experiment done on rats. Why rats? Because we have a lot common between our counter species, rats and ourselves, and that's the reason we do a lot of experiments on rats. And the experiment is about motivation in rats. How much more a rat is motivated to get some new food. To get some new food, they put all the obstacles between the rat and the food itself. And what they found is the more a rat is hungry, the more it is motivated to go get the food. And that's one point. But the experiment doesn't end there. They actually put some cat litter in the path of the rat, behind rat. What they found was rat is even more motivated to get away from cat litter, because rats they don't like cat litter at all, and it is a survival question for rats. And because of cat litter, rats are more motivated to go forward. And it actually applies to our own life, where we all have our aspirations and dreams to go forward and achieve something and go forward. And most of the times we are limited by our own fears, our own uncertainties, and our own insecurities, and everything that stops us. And most of the times, these are the reasons that we give ourselves not to go forward. And Peterson tells a particular thing about his own work, that is future authoring program. Here, he made this tool called, he actually made 3 tools, I think: past authoring, future authoring, I forgot the third one. But so in future authoring program, the idea is to write everything that we want to do next 3 to 5 years. Write down everything that we want to do and write how we are going to achieve that, the paths themselves. That is the work that he has done, and many of his students have taken it. And he says that many people actually write back to him how their life has become much better when they have a clear goal ahead, and that gave them the process to go achieve them. But at the same time, he tells one more thing. in future authoring program, he doesn't just mention what would happen if they did everything right and how they would feel when they achieved it. There is a second part to it, that is, what would happen if they do not do what they want to do? That is everything that leads to that particular situation, all the resentment, all the fear, all the hopelessness and the anger, everything that builds into them if they do not do the things that they want to do in 3 to 5 years. And Peterson mentions that is more important than just looking into the future and seeing the bed of roses and seeing everything that is done, that is being happened as we want it to happen. So for that, he tells, write everything how you would feel if you don't have it happened in 3 to 5 years. That actually motivates a person more. So recapping, 3 things that we discussed. There is a progression in the story itself in biblical stories, that from Noah's Ark to Abraham's covenant, there is a switch in responsibility, and the switch is gradual, and as we go forward we will see the same kind of switch happening with Moses and King David and everyone else that are coming after. Punctuations are the stories that we land on at a particular place, and if we want to go to a new place, we will have to shed a particular set of behaviors, characters, and only then we can go forward. That's the idea of punctuations. And learning, sacrifice, and commitment. Commitment is doing something, which also implicitly says that we are not doing everything that is not related to the thing that we are doing. Motivation. About motivation, it's not just looking ahead and aiming for something and going, but at the same time we'll have to calculate what we would feel if we don't do the thing. That's the end of it, but at the same time I would like to add more topics to discuss. There are so many topics, I don't want to go into detail, but there are a few topics that he discussed that are very interesting. One thing is about artists, how they bring the new information into existence by imaginative representation and exploration and articulation. He was talking about people's personalities. If a person is open, they are creative. If a person is extroverted, they want to be social. If they are agreeable, they want to get into relationships and they want to maintain the relationships. If someone is conscientious, they want to really work and take load upon themselves. And he was asking to develop an eye for art, and he was concerned about conservative a conservative mind cannot appreciate, has less tendency to appreciate art, and real art is a window into transcendent. Talking about humanities, he was talking about how Barcelona Cathedral, it is planned for 300 years. He planned to get built in 300 years. The long-term vision of someone, and we don't see that in today's buildings. And he was talking about how university buildings are losing all their beauty, and how music speaks the meaning to people, and how we should establish relationship with beauty and beauty, essentially. He was talking about how we should learn to read, write, think, speak, and communicate properly. He was alluding to the idea of man does not live by bread alone, he lives by beauty and art. And again, he talked a little bit about Nietzsche and Catholic Church, and an idea that we discussed earlier, that an European mind, it was systematized cognitively for 1500 years, and that was the reason it gave rise to scientific revolution. And the idea of Nietzsche is slavery is the intermediary between undeveloped individual and a free individual. And about that continuing that thought, it also resonates in biblical stories that all people are subject to tyranny that precedes freedom. We can see that in Adam's story and Abraham generations going into slavery, and only then they'll get out of it. Road to entanglement. At first, well, this is Jungian idea. Well, Peterson made a very good point. If enlightenment is possible, why we are not getting enlightened all the time? If it's that easy. Jung made this point that at first, on the road to enlightenment, at first we will encounter all the things that we do not want to encounter. That's exit from ignorant encapsulation, plummet into chaos. That's everything that we do not want to see, and only then there is a path to betterment. Another point is equilibrium state and state of equilibrium and state of non-equilibrium, voluntary tyranny and involuntary tyranny. And then he gets into Abraham, Sarah, Hagar, and Ishmael's story. And he discusses a lot about trust in integrity of a spirit, and material stability in the face of chaos, and natural resources, how Japan, even without natural resources, it built its economy on trust. And he gives an example of eBay and how eBay business, everything is based on trust. And trust and courage, and trust, not naive trust, but eyes opened trust, that we know that people can be corrupt. We should take that into account, and only then we can trust. And these are some major points that he discussed, so we can take them into our discussion. And that's from me, guys. Figure, if you want to take over.
Yeah. So hello, everyone. Thank you, Victor, for your presentation. I want to talk about more specifically about the story itself. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out some sort of background information, which is that one of the fundamental patterns in the Bible is this pattern of heaven and earth, soul and body, sort of theory and fact, this like sort of duality of you have something higher and something lower. And this duality represents sort of an idea, an identity, and then it's like physical manifestation. And so you have, let's say, you have a soul, and then that soul is embodied in a physical body. You have, let's say, laws, let's say, traffic laws or whatever laws, and then these are embodied in specific cases when people are driving on the road. They either violate the law or they don't violate the law. So you have this relationship between the abstract, let's say, and the concrete, the theoretical and the material. And so what happens is that, and what a covenant represents, what a covenant represents is sort of an agreement or a promise, in case of God, of an alignment between the abstract, between the theory and the facts. So God says that, so God promises Abraham that he will go to this land and he will inherit, he will have a son, and his children will form a nation. And so he's presenting himself as an identity to people who follow God. And then but the world, the material world, the factual world, there's no alignment at that moment. Like when Abraham is still in his father's village, there's no alignment. The theory sort of doesn't align with the facts. And so the covenant is a promise that at some point, these two things are going to align. And so, but the interesting thing about the story is that we initially begin with a very vague sort of promise, which is simply go to this other land. And then as the story progresses, the promise becomes more and more concrete. So we start off with go to this other land. And if you've watched any of Peterson's other lectures, you will see this diagram where it's an oval shape, and there's like you are here and you're going to a specific location. And that's basically the most fundamental pattern of behavior of human beings. And so we start Abraham's story with the most vague or most highest level sort of pattern of behavior. And then as Abraham sort of is able to participate in that, the covenant sort of gets updated in some sense, or updated is not the wrong word. It becomes more concrete. And so as he moves forward, then he says, well, I'm going to give you this specific land. And then he says, you're going to have a son. And then later on, Peterson didn't cover this part of the story. He says, you're going to have a son in a year. And then so on and so on. And so the covenant becomes more and more concrete as Abraham sort of demonstrates that he's able to do the things that God is telling him to do or is asking him to do. And so, yeah. And so the covenant is fleshed out, and in an interesting fashion, the form of God is also fleshed out in this pattern. So in the beginning, God is just a voice, then God appears as a vision, and then I think this is going to be in the next week, God appears to Abraham as 3 angels or strangers. And so we have this sort of further and further concretization, and it sort of follows with what Victor presented in the story, that as we move towards the New Testament, things get more and more concrete, more and more sort of material, and less abstract. And so this allows, and so the story as it progresses, it's showing how Abraham is trying to resolve this difference between the theory and the facts, let's say. And so one of the parts of the story which Peterson discusses is when Abraham decides, or his wife Sarah suggests that since she can't have children, that maybe Abraham should sleep with one of her servants, and that way he can have a son. And this is an attempt by Abraham and Sarah to sort of, on their own behalf, to attempt to have the facts and the theory aligned. So they know that God has promised them that they will have a son, but they look around, they don't have a son. And so they attempt to reconcile the facts with the theory. And the interesting thing is that this is an exact opposition to modern thinking, specifically scientific thinking, where we adjust the theory to match the facts. And so this is I think a stark contradiction or difference between traditional thinking and modern thinking, where in modern thinking we say, oh, well, if the facts don't line up with the theory, then the theory is wrong. Whereas you see in Abraham's story and in traditional stories, they try to adjust the facts, so to speak, the material world to meet the theory. And this is an interesting thing that we can maybe discuss about. And so, my final point about this is that in trying to adjust the facts to the theory, the earth to heaven, Abraham ends up having a son, not from his wife, but from the servant. And then the servant, she takes her son and she runs away effectively. And then interestingly, God promises her that her son will also be the father of many nations. And in Islamic tradition, Hagar's son is the leader, is sort of the father of Muslims, specifically the Prophet Muhammad. And it's very interesting that we see that even to this modern day, that sort of Muslims and Jews, or even Muslims and Christians, are at odds with each other. And it sort of harkens back to this original story where there was like a deviation or a detour, so to speak, where Abraham and Sarah decided to take things into their own hand. And now sort of, if you're going to take it very abstractly, like Abraham's quote-unquote legitimate descendants have been at odds with Abraham's illegitimate descendants. And so we can see this playing out in the physical world, where these two sides are trying to resolve this issue of legitimacy versus illegitimacy. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Bagur. That was wonderful. And folks, let's discuss what you have got from the lecture, and you can go ahead and type an exclamation mark, and then we can discuss what you have gotten from it. Yeah. Joe, you can go first.
Hi guys. I mean, it was a fantastic, both of you, fantastic presentations and setting us up. To me, and it's interesting that Bigor, actually, how you mentioned just now that the facts are made to meet the theory, because that's essentially how you can sometimes transcend what man actually can imagine, and that's a lot of like what Kierkegaard had written about, and it's a very interesting thing because it calls that the night of faith. But just getting back to what Peterson was talking about, I thought the most intriguing thing or most substantial thing that in this particular lecture had to do with trust, and how its importance in society, and essentially how this covenant with God essentially allows us to not only function as a society on a very practical level with the concretes of our economies, but also it allows us to endure the chaos that is ultimately ensues in our lives. And essentially that if our goal, he mentioned specifically, is to be happy, that as soon as we get hit in the face, that that is not going to be a very good result. Whereas if you have an ethical framework and a covenant that is something that transcends this world, or just our immediate pleasures, that then that is something that will sustain you through the chaos. So if you get diagnosed with cancer, that life doesn't go as planned. But the idea that trust as a social lubricant too is really kind of important. And he goes through an example of eBay, but I'll just give another example that another behavioral economist actually often has given, is that he went to a South American store in order to purchase a pen. He goes in to purchase the pen. He picks the pen, they hand a note back to him. He goes to the next person, who then he hands that note down, and then he gives them a price and pays that person. Then he goes to the third person, who then gives them the pen. And his point being is that the store owner didn't trust anybody in the store, so he had to come up with this elaborate system in order to actually to just sell something as simple as a pen. So that we kind of, when you think about it in terms of its practical significance on a concrete level, that it's essential to our lives. But what the Bible does is it establishes it through stories, and the importance of it through stories. I mean, even if we talk about covenants today, we talk about restrictive covenants or unrestricted covenants in financial terms. It still has its role in how it actually impacts our daily activities. And essentially economies that don't trust each other end up in chaos. And you could see that where in the previous Soviet Union, where people were actually incentivized to not even trust their neighbors. They were actually incentivized to rat on their neighbors. So that is like the actually exact opposite of what you would want as far as a society is concerned. So I found that to be the most intriguing part of this particular essay. I thought that, and how it related to covenants, and how these stories essentially are the abstract stories, that they have meanings that turn into our concretes and how we function in our daily lives. So that to me was the most important. I mean, there were other areas that you guys have touched upon already that were very important, but I think trust as a concrete social lubricant, and as an abstract thing that can actually serve as a guiding light for you to endure the chaos of life, is actually very interesting to explore. Maybe we could talk about that a little bit more later. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Joe. And next we have Dave. And guys, put exclamation mark if you want to try, if you want to talk anything about it. Thank you. Next we have Dave and Brian.
Thanks, Victor and Pregor. Another good discussion. The one thing I wanted to comment on tonight, it came from the Q&A session, and I've really enjoyed the Q&A session after the lecture. He's getting some wonderful questions, but it started with the Abraham and Isaac story. of course, Abraham is this old man who's God has promised that he's going to be the father of all these nations, and he's not able to have children. And said, well, how in the heck is this going to work? And then as you indicated that, okay, well, then he has a child with his servant or his wife's servant, and they realize, well, that didn't really turn out right. So then finally, God then actually enables Sarah to have children, and Isaac is the first child of the way the lineage is supposed to be, according to the way we interpret the story. And then God tells Abraham to go out and sacrifice Isaac, go out and kill him. And sure enough, Abraham goes up on the side of the hill or whatever, and he's ready, to take the knife and make the sacrifice. And then all of a sudden, a lamb, I believe it is, appears in the bush. And then Abraham realizes that's the sign from God that is to be the sacrifice. So he sacrificed the lamb and saves his son. But the way the questioner brought up that the parallel between God sacrificing Jesus, God killing his son Jesus, the crucifixion on the cross, that's what I love about Jordan Peterson. Through all his scholarship, he draws all these parallels and sees all these things that, I was brought up in the Christian church, and I had never heard anybody draw that parallel. But it's quite instructive. And then also Jordan Peterson mentioning that on the cross, Jesus yelling out, "Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" That admitting he is suffering, that he is afraid of his death, and if anything, admitting his humanity, which is the huge question. Is Jesus a man or is Jesus God? If Jesus is God, he would not suffer because he's God. So these interesting contradictions and the things, the story that I'm sure Jordan Peterson is going to have a lot more fun when we get into that towards the end of his lectures. But Jordan Peterson making the point that the Bible has been edited several times, and deciding which books to include and everything else. And he says, well, why would they allow that statement to remain in the Bible the way it's so unintelligible, ununderstandable? But so he's, I think, holding out the promise that I don't know if he's going to figure it out or not, but of more things to try to understand. But anyway, this has been a wonderful journey. As I say, I was brought up Christian, and I'm just learning so many more things, so many more interpretations, so many ways to look at things. It's just been so fascinating. But thanks everyone for a great discussion tonight.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for your inputs. And next we have Brian.
So I also like the focus that or the time and focus that Jordan Peterson spent on trust. I think that's very important. The more recently, and I'm willing to talk about that more later on, but the trust, I'm not sure what is the trust illustrated in this Bible story, but the trust that has come up recently, has been flagged most recently in the schools of psychology, was from feminism. And they really emphasized the importance of trust in transaction or in the economy, just like Joe just did. And it's and it really has to do with trust in the trust arises in the relationship, arises out of a relationship. If you have a relationship, then you can have trust. And what the feminists pointed out is that the more traditional economics, if you will, because they do tend to focus on, just as Jordan Peterson did and as Joe did, focused on the generation of wealth and economics. The more traditional view is certainly since the feudal age has been on transactions instead of relationships. And when you get into the transactional approach to economics, trust becomes a more difficult issue. So on that point, I'll just leave that there. But the other thing I thought was really interesting that I really liked was his the emphasis on the episodes in life, because I really think that's been true in my life, and I think that is because he touches on it, and so many other people touch on it. I think it's true in many people's lives that there are transitions and transformations that occur during life, and if you want to, yes, there are things you need to leave behind. You don't always know what you need to leave behind, and so there's this suffering there can be suffering and disorientation and loss, and if you will, wandering after you've achieved a success or you've come to even a successful conclusion of a prior episode. Starting up on the new episode can be tough. And the biblical analogy is escaping from the slavery in Egypt before you get to the promised land, which is one I think where there's focus and purpose. The Israelites are wandering for 40 years. There's no focus, no purpose. They don't really know where they're going. And I think a lot, that happened a lot in my life. And, often every time there's, some transition and particularly in relationships, like graduating college or getting married or raising kids, there's always a transition at the end. And it just really resonated with me that there's usually some period of wandering and wondering what the next step is going to be. The last thing I would say is that that I find really kind of important is that each person, they talk about Abraham as the father of nations. If you stop and think about it, I said this at another meetup, but I'll say it again. Everyone becomes a father of nations or a mother of nations. Everyone spreads their genes in the same way that Abraham did. If you look at the world, you might say, I don't know how many descendants of Abraham there are, but let's say there's 1 million, more or less direct descendants. Each of them has very, very little genetic attachment or genetic connection to Abraham, because they've got each of these people maybe they have Abraham, but they also have 2 million other ancestors. So it's really quite diluted. But then the other point is that's true of everyone. And I thought of this when I was preparing the eulogy for my mother, is that she's got her genes out in the world now, and she's going to be a mother of nations. And that's true of each of you, is that you're going to be mothers and fathers of nations. And this is not only in terms of genes, but in terms of memes, the ideas that you put out there. And I think that the ideas are more important than the genes, because the ideas do not become so diluted. They will get diluted, they will get changed, but I think that they endure more, especially if they resonate with other people. They endure more than the genes themselves. So each of us has potentially tremendous potential viewed over a period of generations. It's a potential that's quite similar to the story of Abraham. So that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Brian. And next we have Jean.
Yeah, I want to also talk a little bit about trust. Yeah, I found this it's quite interesting because I mentioned earlier in this other meeting, I deal with a lot of clients come from China, like the new immigrant for my architecture business, because they usually don't speak English. And so I found a common problem is they don't really have trust to the people. And it's very hard when you deal with people don't really have the basic trust, because here we assume people are not guilty until they prove they're guilty. So I think a lot of them just assume you're guilty until you prove you're not guilty, which is, personally, I think it's very highly inefficient for society to run. So it makes me more appreciate, the society based on trust. I think it's important. I also realize why, because I don't have religion, and then the people fill the form like what religion you believe. And I understand now why people want people to have religion, because it's more about then you have a basic rule, they will follow basically. So it's either like if we're all Christian, even though it's different branches, at least we know we follow the same rule, just like you play a game. If everybody follow the same rule, then it's easier to play a game. But when you play with someone who don't really follow the rule, it makes it harder. So it makes me understand why we want people, and also why religion is important in some way, because it's kind of set up a common rules and common games people play with, because then there's no limitation. Sometimes people don't really follow the basic rule, make it very harder for people to interact with each other. Anyway, just some of my thoughts on this.
Well, thanks so much, Shane. And I'm just concluding. I'm just wrapping up the points mentioned by Joe. Yeah, actually, we have Brian. We have Brian next.
Well, if you want to talk more about trust, I'm glad to do that, because I have given that a lot of attention over the years, and I'm still giving it attention, quite aside from these meetups. I find it's a very interesting topic. And I guess I'd have to say, I think trust is being more and more diluted, at least in my own experience or in my own understanding. It's not, I don't know where we were at in the past, but I think there's probably not enough trust in economic relations today. And I can't put a figure on it, but let's say it's 10 to 20% of the people are not trustworthy. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but that's enough to mess up the game for everybody. I found that really the trust is really more available within organizations than between organizations. Because within an organization, there's a relationship, there's an accountability. So the vice president tends to be accountable to the executive vice president or whomever, the superior. That relationship establishes accountability. So the vice president is more trustworthy. But if you have dealings with that vice president with the vice president of another company, the trust can be out the window. And that's why there's so many lawyers. I was a lawyer for years and years. Business people know that. Sophisticated business people know that. And so they do not unnecessarily trust other people in a transactional situation where there's no relationship. And I can tell you, I've spent a lot of time documenting transactions, even high ticket transactions with sophisticated business people. They do not trust each other. And that's why they have these lawyers documenting deals that run 10, 20, 100, even some, I've seen them run 200 pages, which is really way too much, but because they don't trust each other. And they don't, typically there's what's called a closing for a big deal. And that is that I won't give you the airplane until you give me the money. That's if you're the airplane seller. And then the airplane buyer says, well, I won't give you the money until you give me the airplane. So they get together and they have this meeting where they exchange the money in the airplane simultaneously. You know, they shuffle paper over a table. They do not trust each other. And there's a good reason for that. The law really does not support trust. The English law, the American law, the law of the states in America does not support you, will not back you up if you unnecessarily trust other people in a commercial transaction. The basic rule is that if you cannot lie to another person in a business deal, but you can keep secrets. So the sellers try to keep a lot of secrets. They don't tell you anything. If they can avoid telling you anything, they will do that. So if you're a buyer, you have to ask the right questions, and then you have to get the answers written down in a contract. Those are called warranties. And even if you get them written down, this is something that many people don't appreciate. Even if you get them written down in a contract, it means very little, because then you have to go sue that person. Let's say that it's in the airplane deal. I gave you the airplane, you gave me the money. Okay, now I've got my money. I know what money is. I know what money's worth. You've got my airplane. It might be a total dud and a lemon. You didn't ask the right questions, so you didn't know, but you did ask the right questions and I made a misrepresentation. Guess what? I lied. Now you have to sue me. That's going to cost you years of litigation, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if you win, you are a loser. And that's just the way our legal system and our markets are set up. So you really need to be a diligent buyer. The cards are stacked in favor of sellers. And the one reason religion is considered, people who are religious are considered more trustworthy, is that if you have first of all, if you have an ongoing commercial relationship, let's say monthly payments or whatever, monthly rents, yeah, then you're going to pay and you're going to get the monthly access to the apartment or whatever, if that's an ongoing relationship. But if it's a one-off relationship, then religion's important. You could be a part of the same community and your reputation matters. It'll get back to other people that you have been untrustworthy. Plus, people who are really quite religious will believe that if they lie or cheat another person, somehow God will hold them accountable. And there's the relationship between themselves and God, which leads them to be trustworthy. So there is usually some sense of relationship that leads to accountability. If there's no relationship, then I would not vest any unnecessary trust in anyone. And that's the way business works here. That just is the way it is.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. And next we have Evanik and then Jean.
So a couple of things when I was thinking about this is, one thing is that I think trust kind of has to be earned, in that you get trusted in the small things and then you build that relationship. I don't think it just automatically comes. And I think in anything, in religion, in business dealings, you're trusted with small things and then you're trusted with big things. I just want to respectfully disagree with Brian's point about the government creates laws that makes it, I don't want to misconstrue what he said, but it makes trustworthy, it doesn't support trust. It's not that it doesn't support trust, it's that when a court is trying to decide who is right or who is wrong.
Well,
If you,
Evanik, sorry to interrupt you. let's stay on the topic of what we got from the lecture, and once
Okay.
we're going to the breakout rooms and come back, then we can go into each topic. So
Okay.
yeah, sorry about that.
No, no worries. So yeah, so what I get from the lecture is that in a sense, I think it wasn't so much, I think what I got from the lecture is that Abraham trusted God in a sense. So, and God proved himself because he kept blessing Abraham. Yeah, there were some hiccups, but I think even God had to earn, and I know this sounds weird, but even God had to earn Abraham's trust. Like he, like according to the story, he almost proves himself to be God and reveals himself to be God, and that's what enables the trust.
That's a great point, Evanik. Thank you. And Jane, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I found it's quite interesting about you gain trust with small things, then gradually to the bigger things. Actually, a lot of scam actually come from that. I think, for example, like the investors, you invest a little bit, then they reward you a lot of money, like the Ponzi scheme. And I think there's another similar one in New Zealand. The woman actually found disappeared with a lot of money. So that's a lot of scammers use that to build trust with smaller investment, get a lot of reward. Then they invest in a big investment. They just basically use the newer buyers to pay off. Anyway, I think, yeah, what I want to share is I think another way for our society, because we live in such big communities, hard to know each other. I found very helpful thing is the review, because I actually ran Airbnb for a short time when I was renting, renting part of the house, so where my mom had to live downstairs. And I found the review actually is very critical when you rent to someone you don't know and for a short time. And when I was traveling, I was almost to rent a place to someone. And later on, I read his review. It said he's marked on the walls, all this. I was like, oh no. And I was on the airplane flying back. I have to call Airbnb because I approved the reservation call to cancel it. And he said, oh, I'm on the way. Why you cancel my? I said, sorry, you have bad review. I don't want to take risk. And I'm going to pay you extra money for the, for the deposit. I said, why don't you use that money to rent somewhere else? But anyway, so I just want to say, I think it's important to have review to help us during that situation. I wish there are more reviews for doctors. And so we know what we deal with. The problem is in not transparency, like the food, you can easily find a review of restaurant. Usually, even though there may be some fake, but the majority will be more accurate. I think in the world where it's impossible to know everybody, the review will kind of hold each other accountable in some way. That's it.
Thanks, Jane. And very good points made by Joe, Dave, Brian, and Jean, and Evanik over here. Just summarizing, it looks like the topic of trust struck a chord with most of us. And Joe mentioned ethical framework that transcends the current situation. So that's important. And focusing on just happiness is a losing game in a certain way. And economy-wise, Soviet Union and lack of trust. So at that point, and Dave mentioned, he felt something interesting in a question and answer section with Abe and Isaac relationship, and God, and Peterson culminating at Christ getting killed on cross. So that part. And Brian focused a lot on trust and relationships and how our system is built not to unnecessarily trust, which is important. And Evanik mentioned a very good point that God even had to try in a way to prove his trust to Abraham. And Jean focused on trust again, which is great. And let's go into breakout rooms. We have multiple topics to discuss. And yeah, so Peterson discussed a lot about beauty and how beauty plays a role in our life. And yeah, he explored a lot on trust too. So let's go into breakout rooms with these topics.
Hey, in your lecture, you were talking about punctuation and a learning period, the way you shed your previous methods and you proceed for the future and start something new. How is it possible to completely shed what you have been accustomed to all this time and then move on to your future for something unpredictable and something new?
Great question.
How is that possible? That's my question.
How to leave the attitudes and behaviors that we developed and accustomed to and move to the new place. That's
Thank
a
you.
great question.
Thank you, Victor. I like the way you reframed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Rosine.
I guess I would articulate it as from the story of Abraham. It's like, okay, clearly he didn't always know how to interpret what God meant, and he had the advantage of getting a direct promise somehow. And God eventually came through, but for lessons for us now, it's the what to trust in or how to recognize at this punctuation points. How do we recognize what to trust? What is God in our current life events?
How to recognize the current promise, that the potential promise that we have.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, I got that. And next we have Jean, Joe, and David.
So my question is, the trust is very important for society, but blindly trust authority, will that be very dangerous, like creating the Hitler dominant the world eventually? So that's my question.
Wonderful. Blind trust. So that is a problem, and how to differentiate trust with the blind trust. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Jean. And next we have Joe.
All right, this is a very, very selfish question, and it's a simple one, but I just would like to actually crowdsource it. Is the idea, he covers it quite clearly, why happiness is not a good goal. But I would like to hear what everybody else has to say about that. Like, why is happiness, why do you think happiness is not necessarily an appropriate goal in order to deal with chaos?
Great question there. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. I think we got it. And our resident scribe is getting to them, I hope. And advance thanks to Pigor. Yeah. Kevin, you're next.
My question is something. Let's see. Assume we don't have a God. What do we lose? God and the stories. If we love story, what are we missing?
So if we don't have God, what do we lose?
Yeah, or we love their story, what we, what we miss? Two part or one part?
That's a great question. Thanks, Kevin. And anyone else? And if not, so what we have up until now is this question: how can we make it possible the accustomed? Yeah, Pegor, thanks so much. And the questions I'm just repeating here: how is it possible to completely shed your entire old self in order to move into the new? How can we identify what we can trust in and where we can find God in the present? Rojan's question. And is blindly trusting an authority dangerous? That's the third one. And how can we resolve it? And Joe's question, is happiness a good and appropriate goal to deal with chaos? And Kevin's question, what do we lose if we don't have God? Thanks so much. And let's start with trust. So how can we identify how can we identify what we can trust in and where we can find God in present? Anyone wants to tackle that?
I'll start off. So in order to understand the concept of trust, or not necessarily the concept, in order to find out who to trust or what to trust, we have to understand the concept of a hierarchy. And so we all have this concept of hierarchy, but the idea of a hierarchy is you have something above and you have something below. And the thing is that the thing above grants unity and identity to the thing below and takes care of the thing below. And then the thing below sort of submits to the thing above and provides sort of potential to the thing above. And so you can think of it in terms of a country. So you have, let's say, you have the US federal government, that the federal government provides unity to all the states within the federal government. But the federal government cannot exist without the individual states. So the individual states represent potentiality for the federal government, because the federal government can collect taxes and whatever, and the people actually live in the states. No one lives in the federal government. Everyone lives, maybe except for people in Washington, D.C., but like everyone else lives in a state, and then they all fall under the unity of the federal government. And so when you see an authority or something above you that is actually taking care of you, or is looking after the things below it properly, that's a sign of something that you can trust in, because it is actually performing its function as a unifying force, as the thing above you in the hierarchy. So you can think of it even in family terms. Let's say if you live in a family and you're, let's say, a kid, if your parents aren't taking care of you, they're not giving you enough food, they're not giving you enough fun, they're not taking you to school, you stop, even as a child, you start creating this distance between you and your family, because your parents, the ones above you in the hierarchy, are no longer performing their functions properly. And so it creates this problem. And you might in fact see this in a lot of kids, where then the child meets someone else, maybe the uncle, who is performing that role properly. And so they get attached more to the uncle or the aunt or to someone else outside of the parent structure, because the child at the end of the day needs some kind of authority and structure. And so understanding this and being able to see this pattern in the world, and then knowing which entities are performing their functions properly as the ones above, let's say, can tell us who we can trust and who we can't trust.
Thanks, Pagor. That's a great way to relate both things, that what we are aiming to and where we are and how to trust it. Well, thank you so much. And next we have Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. So that's a great example, the concrete aspect of it. If you have a rule and it's not necessarily serving its purpose, then no longer you're going to lose faith in that rule as to why it even exists in the first place, and then it'll ultimately, if it should, go away and change. That's the concrete way of looking at it. So I was thinking about it in terms of well, I think actually Pagor said it perfectly in the sense that the hierarchy that we even look at, and how our governments work and whether they're servicing us or not, is a way of determining whether we should trust within the institution itself. However, I think that there's an abstract part of this as well, that has to do with ethics and principles. And I kind of think that this is where the Bible or whatever ethical system that you're subscribing to kind of comes in, as to whether I'm going to, and it kind of transcends man-made institutions in this case. So I have a philosophy of life with a set of principles that I'm going to live by, and I'm not going to violate those principles. And, regardless of who's feeding me or not. So that there's this concrete aspect of it, but there's also this philosophical aspect of it that I think is really important when you're talking about trust. You got to trust in the system that you're living your life by. Now, most people don't have philosophies of life. They don't necessarily think about cognitive dissonance, but it is incredibly painful if you don't consider those things too. And I think the whole point is Jordan Peterson's asking us to consider those things in general. But that's my answer, is that you have to have a set of principles that you believe in, and then you can know what to trust, because that's your moral compass for your decision making. But you have to have certain axioms that you believe in.
Great points. We need to have our own set of principles apart from the socially structured principles. Great point. Well, thanks, Joe. And next we have Jean and Dave.
Yeah, I agree with what Joe mentioned, because I think perform your basic duty or responsibility is important. For example, as parents, you have to feed your kids, but also how you feed your kids. If you steal to feed your kids, maybe then the kids actually grow up, they have a moral sense. They no longer think it's a good parents, even though they still get fed pretty well. So I think there are other standards beside the basic responsibility. Same as, the German occupy the Jews, even though the German people are okay, but they still should have consciousness. A lot of them are, so these are not just judge the function by itself, but also by some kind of moral standard besides that.
Thanks so much, Shane. And next we have Dave. Brian.
Yeah, I think we're talking trust here. I think we've got a pretty good system in our country. And a big part of it's competition. Because, okay, when you want to buy if you want to buy a used car from individual, whatever, yeah, you better be careful. You better pay a mechanic to check it over for you that knows something. Or if you buy a house, you better have an inspector check the roof and check things, the foundation, make sure it's not termites. But go in the grocery store to get a can of beans or a sack of flour, whatever, you trust competition, because a lot of times there's another grocery store across the street and they sell their reputation. If they sell you junk food that you get sick on or whatever, you're going to quit going to that store. You're going to go across the street to the other store. Or if they charge outrageous prices, everybody, they have sales and stuff back and forth to play games with the prices. But pretty much the market regulates itself. But yeah, the thing of it is, then working with individuals, you do have to have some trust. And I would say, for peace of mind, doesn't mind to be disappointed every once in a while, rather than stay at home and worry, because your peace of mind is worth something to you. So I think that's something we can all take into consideration. Anyway, good discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Next is Brian. Yeah, next is Brian. Yeah.
The focusing, I was digesting Pagor's comment. I thought it was really, really interesting and a good comment. So I missed out what Joe was saying. I apologize for that, but I think I caught everybody else's comments. And what Pagor was saying, I thought was good. But I'd like to go back to the Abraham story and use that as the basis for, at least the story that we've been through so far, as the basis for understanding the broader statements about authority. And I think, at least as regards the Abraham story, it's based on a covenant. That it's, if you trust me, then I will give you something in the future. And I think it was pointed out rightly by David Miller in our group that God tested Abraham's trust before giving him these things. And that is not if you will, if you forgive me, it's not an iterative situation. It's not, if God's going to give him this thing once, it's going to give him the promised land once, and Abraham needs to demonstrate his trust maybe more than once before he gets the land. In other situations and that's where I think honestly some of our trust in authority, and I'm not talking now about the market transactions and competition and all that, but the authority, because we're born into a lot of hierarchies. There's a lot of hierarchical arrangements, but they're not the same as this one-off that I'll give you the promised land. It's more an iterative process that I'll give you what you need every month or every week, or over time you will get what you need. And to the extent that authorities play a role in that, I think Pagor and others have rightly said, if the authority does not deliver on its promises, then the trust is eroded. Going back to the story of Abraham, there was no point for Abraham to demonstrate his trust in God if there had been no covenant, if there had been no promise from God. What's the point of sacrificing your son if you're not getting the promised land? That was the whole deal. And it's the same, I think, in the authority arrangements and hierarchical arrangements now, but it's more of an iterative process. It's not a one-off. And I think that that's how authorities get eroded if they don't deliver on their promises. And I don't know, I don't want to go off on current events, but I think many people feel today that authorities have not delivered on their promises. Many people in many different ways feel that they've been betrayed by authority. And so the trust is eroding. That's just my thoughts on what Pagor said. I thought it was very interesting.
Thanks, Brian. And so what we have next is very much related to the topic that we are discussing about trust. And Jane's question is, can we blindly trust an authority? Is blindly trusting authority is dangerous, and how can we resolve it? It nicely ties into the topic that we are discussing. And about this question, do anyone have any answers? Right, so I see Brian on my end first. Brian, do you want to go?
All right, well, I don't think this is my answer. I think this is Jordan Peterson's answer. And the answer is no, you cannot, because he's talked time and time again about tyranny and conscience and the play between tyranny and conscience, not just in these lectures, but in his books about the rules of life, that we need to listen to our conscience. We need to pay attention to the small things, like in arranging our own lives, and that can have positive ripple effects throughout life. And I think that's true. That's the memes I was talking about earlier. You can have incalculable positive impact by putting your memes out there. And for better or for worse, just putting them out there for the test, like we're doing in these meetup groups. So what was the question again? I thought at another point. What was the question?
can we blindly trust the authority, and how can we solve this problem?
Oh, put the positive out there as regards your own behavior, but also as regards behavior of authorities. If you feel it's wrong, like it's tyrannical in some way, Jordan Peterson has given lots of examples of how we should, in different ways, I guess, fail to comply, stand up, resist. Solzhenitsyn, I think, is his best example of that. So those are I think, the two aspects that I think are Jordan Peterson's answer to that question.
Yeah, great points. Thanks, Brian. And next, we have Joe, Pegor, and Evanik. Joe, you're next.
No, I mean, I absolutely don't think you can blindly trust authorities. I think that there's always, I mean, you're kind of abdicating your responsibility if you are doing that. So I think that that's kind of the point where it's interesting that this comes up with the Bible as a topic, because the idea of trusting God is you're trusting a higher power that supersedes man's comprehension, and so that that trust is supersedes a certain amount of rational thinking at a particular moment in time, and that's really kind of important because it's rational thinking has not always given us the answers that we wish to have had. Now, does that mean that you buy the Bible hook, line, and sinker? That's no. You're supposed to, and this is where he talks about, this is where things we need to read people like Nietzsche in order to have this type of investigation, in order to come to our own conclusions. And that he does it. He has a good example of that in this particular lecture, of some of the criticisms of religion, Nietzsche's criticisms of religions, but some of the things that he appreciated too about religion as well. So the answer, I think, is an unequivocal no. You can't trust blindly, and that you need to do your own investigation.
Great points, Joe. Next, we have Pegor, Evanik, Dave. Pegor, you can go.
Yeah, so sort of in line with my previous answer, if you blindly trust an authority, then you will allow that authority, that thing above you, to stop taking care of you while you remain submitted to it. And so you have it, like, if you like that, then sure, trust the authority blindly and don't care. But everyone sort of has a limit at some point where they go, well, I'm submitting to this thing, but I'm not getting anything in return. And then they rebel. And like, you see, it's the same thing with, like, when you protest. What is a protest? It is the below expressing its discontent with whatever is coming from above. And that is in some way a challenge to the authority of the above. And that's why you see then the riot police in gear show up, and they tear gas and push everyone away to sort of shut everyone below down. And so you can, and the question is, you can sort of remain blind, and then you end up having to do protests and even more to restore things to proper, or you can keep a vigilant eye and vote properly and be active in your community, and then you won't have to get tear gas to get what you want. So, but the cost of freedom is vigilance in some. So.
Great way to put it. Thanks, Pegor. Next, we have Evanik.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone else said, is that you don't trust authority, but and I think people who trust, I mean, we see the effects in history of people blindly trusting authority, but I think what people get from doing this, that they don't have to think about their own lives and be responsible for their own lives. When you put blind trust in something, if something goes wrong, you can blame the authority and not yourself. If you can just place blame somewhere else, And I think, and I think that's the attraction of people who do it, is that they can just live their lives normal and they don't really have to think about anything or do anything. So that, to me, I don't think you trust anyone or anything blindly.
Great point, Epinik, especially about responsibility. It kind of creates an excuse for ourselves not to take responsible. We can always blame others if something goes wrong here. That's a great point. Thanks, Epinik. And we have Dave next.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. I think I'll go against the grain a little bit here because I pretty much respect authorities who are specialists in an area. I had open heart surgery about 5 years ago. And, I know my heart was hurting, so I guess maybe I could take a shot of whiskey and get a steak knife and go at it and see how it goes. But I went to a specialist. I have a family doctor, but I recommended a cardiologist, and he gave me special tests and 2 or 3 series of x-rays to figure out what was going on with the old pump. And then a heart surgeon worked on me, which later on I kind of understood what he did. But I think sometimes we have to rely on experts. And it's interesting because, we talk about our system. I drove for Uber for a couple of years, and I would stop for a red light in the middle of the night without a car in sight. And but that's just our respect for authority here, and the way we make things work. I mean, if you take the viewpoint, it's midnight, hell, there ain't gonna be any other cars around. So I'm driving 60 miles an hour down this 30-mile-an-hour residential road. Chances are there's not going to be the car. So what the heck? Just go for it. Why would I stop? Until you meet some other nut going the other direction and you have a big crash. So we have to realize there are benefits to trusting these authorities. And the funny thing is, now we've got these 5-star ratings on everything. Anything online, you look at a restaurant that's rated 4.5 stars or whatever, and you're going to think about going to this movie, it's rated 3 stars. I mean, there's star ratings on everything that's somebody's opinion about what it's. So it's not just blind trust. And as I said, for important things, you do find an expert to help you. But anyway, that's the news from Lake Wobegon. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Next, we have Kevin and Shane Marie.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone got a good point. I would say it's all makes sense. It's a situation based. If you, as general, you don't trust authority, for example, law and rules. What choice you have? You have to follow the rules, right? And also depends on the culture. You've been in a different area, different country. You follow the local rules. And actually, go interested at a point compared to the Brian and the Pigors about the contract. I would say from the 2 gentlemen seeing, we actually got 2 kind of contract. One is hierarchy-based contract, top down or bottom up. Maybe authority like this, like a hierarchy contract. Another side is a business contract. Normally, we prefer the fair contract, hand-to-hand parallel contract. Sometimes we don't have enough. We need a third-party authority. Let's make sure the contract implement. So this situation could be complicated. For the second part of the question, how can we solve this problem? I would say awareness of situation. It's the contract, trust, and regulation culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next, we have Shane Marie.
Hello. I was just thinking, to me, it seems like in terms of trust, most of us take a cowardly stance in one direction or the other. So blind trust to me is not an actual trust, but it's a refusal to take action. And so we claim that we blindly trusted, but when in fact we just failed to take action. But I would also say we tend to run the same risk in a different direction, which is to say that when it comes to like legitimate love or caring and compassion, we also oftentimes fail to trust in those arenas as well and to give ourselves fully. So I think we run that kind of risk on both sides of the spectrum. Thank you.
Great point. Thanks, Shane Marie. And next, let's tackle this important question that Jyoti asked, that is, how is it possible to completely shed the current behaviors and attitudes to move to the new place? That's on the topic of punctuation and in our lives, moving from one episode to another episode. What are the paths and ways that we can use? Igor, you can go next.
Yeah, so I think, and Peterson has mentioned this, the trick is to do it in as small of increments as possible, because that means that less of you has to die in one go. So, I mean, you can not change or not improve yourself for 20 years, and then maybe you end up even actually dead completely, because like you've not changed for so long that you can't sort of survive in this new world. And you can see these kind of examples with like people who were working jobs that don't no longer exist anymore. You know, like people who used to do like manual computations for like NASA, like those jobs disappeared overnight. And so if you weren't preparing for that, you effectively sort of died in some sense, because you're unemployable anymore at this point. And so the smaller the increment of change, so the smaller the increment of going into the new, the smaller change you're going to need. And just like this small cycle is always better than the giant, larger cycles.
Great point, Pagor. Thank you. Next, we have Dave.
Yeah, thanks. To me, I remember Jordan Peterson talking about order and chaos and having one foot on each side of the line, because it's difficult to go completely into chaos. You want, and it's, of course, the safe thing to stay completely in order, but then you never go anywhere, you never accomplish anything. But the thing is, sometimes you're stuck going both feet into chaos. And all I can say is you have to make the best of it and find some way for self-assurance, for self-trust, help from others, and I don't know, we call it lucky horseshoe and the lucky penny, a few other things to take along on the voyage. But yeah, there are times in life that we go through big changes and a new job or whatever, or a move. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Next, we have Jill.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so with this particular question, I would just say, I mean, you have to let a part of yourself die. And I agree with Pagor. It's that you, in order to make this as painless as possible, you want to make those iterations as often as possible. So, and I think the example of jobs is actually an excellent one, that people are being asked to iterate and change their jobs continuously. And if you don't embrace that change, then ultimately that you will be unemployable and out of a job, and you didn't let part of your old self die, and it's costing you in your current life. I think it's just a matter of basically, yeah, you have to let part of it, and sometimes those changes are significant, and sometimes they're not. But I guess that depends on how often you embrace or how often you make those changes as well. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Small changes and how often we do it. That's an important thing. Well, thanks, Joe. And next we have Jyoti.
Yeah, that is my question. And I'm glad, Joe, your input was very helpful. The question is related to myself. I've worked very hard. I came from another country. I came here. I shifted gears. I wore different hats and I worked very hard. I'm retired now. Now I'm at the point where I don't want to work hard. And if I do something now, I want to get rid of what my good motto was in my life, which was like, be a sincere worker, be conscientious, and that paid me. I'm happy I did that. But that's not what I want to do in my retirement. And that's what my question was. How do I shed my previous work ethics and motto that paid me and that helped me to grow and where I am now? I want to do volunteer work, but I don't want to put myself forth so much that I did in the past that I feel like this is my another job. You understand what I'm saying? Because whatever my attitudes were in the past are going to come. They're going to be transferred in my new place. So I'm like, not this place, not this place, not that place. I'm trying to weigh where I will fit in. And I know in the end, I'm going to start working very hard. And my family tells me, don't do that, Mom. This is your time now. Take it easy. And I can't seem to do that. So that's why I asked that question. How do you completely shed your previous attitudes and behaviors and wear a different hat altogether that doesn't even match that?
Well, thank you, Jyoti. Thanks so much. And next we have Jean, Pegor, and Brian. And Jean, you are next.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting what Jyoti mentioned, because I think my mom is very similar. You know, she's used to be a manager of the company, and so she always take more responsibility at work and do things very detail-oriented, think all the possibility of failing. Now she's retired. She treat life like how she treat the work, because she doesn't have much more important thing to deal with. She deal with life much too stressfully. I said, you just take it easy, deal with it. But I think when you have a certain mindset you get used to, it's hard to change. It's just like you use one tool in your toolbox so much, it's hard to get used to the other two in your box. So I'm not sure, I think, how to relax, you know. About the job, we are living in a world very uncertainty, you know, things change dramatically. I even tell my kids, you know, because doesn't matter what major you learn, things could change in 10, 20 years or even sooner. You know, I think it's so funny, we always educate the kids to the most popular career we are now. And when they graduate, they may not even find a job. So it's not like forward thinking, it's more like we are kind. So I think we have to get used to that. You know, I think it's important to learn how to learn instead of stuck with certain jobs, certain skills, and be a personal problem solver. As a problem solver, it doesn't matter what problem, like Elon Musk, he's not limited by any discipline. He just solve problems, use the most creative way. Then you don't limit it by your career, by your major. I think that's what we need to teach our kids and ourselves too. Then you can be flexible. You can, because life is all about problem solving, no matter big or small. Just solve different type of problems. That's all we need to learn.
Thanks, Jean. Next we have Pegor.
Yeah, I would say, Jyoti, specifically to your situation, I think, and Peterson has mentioned this, try like negotiating with yourself. Like your old self will say, I don't know, work 8 hours for this volunteer thing. But then your new self maybe says, work 2 hours. And so like maybe negotiate with like, let your old self and the self that you want to be negotiate with each other. And then slowly you can shift towards the new you that you want to be. Because like doing the thing like, oh, I'm like, it's like going like, I'm gonna diet and go to the gym 7 times a week. You know, it's not gonna happen. You're not a dictator who can mandate on yourself to do certain things. So you have to accept that yeah, you might want to work extra hours, but you have to, it's like you have to negotiate with yourself, and that's the best way, I think, to do it.
Negotiating with ourselves. That's a great point. Thanks, Pegor. Next, we have Brian.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. So I think again, Jordan Peterson, he's talked about a lot of things. For example, on this issue of trusting God, I'd like to look at the book of Job again, but just looking at this lesson from Abraham, I think that's a limited view, but I'm trying to draw conclusions from that lesson. He talked about, you've raised this topic now about, and I think the episodic nature of life is illustrated by this lesson from these lessons from Abraham, and I think that's really true. I think that's been true in my life. I've been caught off guard and really fallen on my face when I didn't appreciate the episodic nature of life. I think there is a certain wandering, but after each episode, and I'm kind of going through that right now in the same way Jyoti is. But I would also point out, in my opinion, what he's focused on right now is just career. And I think if you want to maintain balance in your life, you need more relationships than just career and preparation for career. That tends to be very important for people. Most people need a job, and it's a great opportunity to do something fulfilling both for yourself and for other people. It's a great way to connect with the world at large through your work, and that's an opportunity that you don't want to miss out on, and you really have that opportunity in anything you do. But I wouldn't for earning a living, but I would not. I wouldn't recommend focusing on that exclusively. I think that family is very important. Friends. I was making a little list here. Family, friends. See what my list is. Community. That could include communities like this or your neighborhood. I try to connect with my neighbors a lot and to help them out if I can. Church groups, volunteer groups. I've done a lot of Boy Scout stuff over my career that serve both the family and the larger community. Nation, politics, if you want to get involved in those things. There are just so many different arenas in which I think you can live an episodic life. And if you have more of these arenas in which you're living episodically, you won't find yourself wandering so much. You could shift from one arena to another and emphasize different ones at different times. And they can be mutually reinforcing. If you're down on your career, you've got your family, friends, church, your friends from Scouts. I had great relationships with other adult leaders in through scouting that turned into friends. So, and also in church, I don't want to get into all the things I've done, but basically the community and the different communities available there. I do agree with the problem solving. I think that's an important skill. I'll come back to career in a minute, but I also think that what Shane Marie said is, having loving relationships, even in your careers, your coworkers and the rest, can really help with avoiding your collapse in, when, let's say, your careers, when one of these episodes comes to an end. I've had a lot of friends in my work context that have helped, even when, it was great to have those friendships and acquaintances out from my work, even when my work was changing and I was changing jobs. It was great to have that continuity. Also, I think if you're looking for continuity, in career, something to carry you from one job to another, I think picking a career that in its foundation includes both the problem solving that Jean referred to and the loving relationship that Shane Marie was pointing at. You need to have, I think you'll do better in terms of the episodic nature of your life if you are engaged in a career that really addresses the needs of other people, fundamental needs. So, I don't want to, you can think about what that might be for yourself, but look at what the professions are. The established professions tend to address the needs of other people. And being embedded in a technology like communications or transportation or food, or there are just so many different technologies out there in engineering. That is also, they tend to address the needs of other people, and being committed to addressing those needs even in management, managers address the needs of other people. So if that can be your focus through your profession, I think that you'll do well. And you'll avoid, again, if you will, the downsides of the episodic and the prolonged wanderings in the desert, if I could, again, use the examples from the Bible.
Got it. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks so much. And next we have Kevin.
You call me?
Yes, Kevin, you can go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. And I thanks everyone for the good point. Yeah, and I like Jyoti's question. And for me, I would say this is basically our life cycle. The first half of our life, maybe growing up, passively we change ourselves. After retirement is a big shift. So the whole life we need is problem solving and the skills we learning along the way. Like one big thing I would say, set up the routine. During the normal working time, we got a day and night, we got a routine. When you relax retirement, it's hard to keep. You sleep on time, schedule, do the things you want to. Yeah, and I like Brian said, community and bring some. Also, another point: prepare ahead, daily, even before you retire. I would say find something like interest, like here. So I would say consume lots of time from my time, but I enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Thank you. And now let's move on to the next interesting question, that is happiness a good and appropriate goal when we are dealing with chaos? Peterson talked a lot about it, about happiness being, if we have happiness as a goal, it's a tricky situation. And he was alluding to responsibility. And about this topic, about this question, do anyone have any answers? Jean, you can go.
Yeah, I actually think happiness should be one of the goal, not the only goal. Because I think the reason we don't put happiness, there's a lot of fable or stories in every different culture about how the three little pigs and the other things about people that just enjoy. Oh, in Chinese, there's this bird singing all day. Everybody's busy preparing for the winter. Then when the winter has nothing to eat, all the stories. So I think what they trying to say, the reason we prepare for future, because we don't just want to be happy now and not happy in the future. So basically we want to be happy in the future, which doesn't mean we can't be happy now, because if you always live in the future, which may not come, so then you never actually have your goal. So that's why I always believe happiness is one of the important goals, but it cannot be the moment, just for one moment happiness. The reason we work hard is for our future happiness as well. So it's kind of balance. How much you want to be happy just for this moment, or how much you sacrifice a little bit now for the future happiness. I think in the end, it's all about happiness to me. So why we come here to suffer, I don't understand.
Great answer, Jean. I like your philosophy towards it, a balance of happiness between now and future. That's a great point. Thanks. Joe, you're next.
Yeah, and the main reason I had some selfish reasons as to asking this question to begin with is it simply doesn't work because it's something that's always in the future. It's fleeting. It's not something that and happiness is not guaranteed to anyone. That's the problem. So that since it's not guaranteed to anyone, then you have to have a something that is a framework that is actually guaranteed to be able to move yourself towards. So you have to move yourself towards a certain principles, and this is why I like Stoic principles, and I'm not knocking Epicurean or anything like that, but the idea that you're moving towards virtue, you have something that you have a target that you can actually hit. But if it's something about pleasure, you get on the hedonic treadmill or something like that, or happiness, it may result as you pursue virtue, but it will not be you're not guaranteed. And I think it's where something, if you pursue happiness, that ultimately it's not only it falls apart as far as a philosophy of life, because it doesn't allow you to endure the chaos that you ultimately have to deal with in everyday life. So I think that this is, again, happiness is not something that is guaranteed for everyone, but you can guarantee yourself an ethical system or virtue, and therefore you would obviously want to move towards something that would allow you to manage the chaos versus a fleeting something, a moving target, so to speak.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks so much. Great insight. Actually, we can expand a lot on what you said, but let's move on. Kevin, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. One time, Joe and a group, we look for what's a major value, like a life value. We look for a house. It's one of them, if he remember. Now he brings the happiness. For me, I would bring the peace. If you live in a war zone, I would say your safety would be main priority. That's you're going to look the moment you are safe. That's your happiness come. And for ordinary people, let's say one tooth is pain, you will look for the moment your tooth not pain. So it's happiness, I would say. It's not too greedy, to think about always happiness. Sometimes calm is also happiness. For example, your meditation make you happy too.
Great. Yeah, it's relative in a way, in a different sense. Thank you, Kevin. Brian, you're next.
I've heard other. I think Jordan Peterson has said, and others in the meetup, that happiness is an epiphenomenon. It's something that occurs when you're on the right path. It's incidental to living the good life. And there's so many, this is one area that obviously philosophers have written a lot about this since Socrates and even before, and in other cultures. But I found it and there's so many approaches, speculative approaches taken by them. I guess from a scientific perspective, I love the speculative philosophical approach, and some resonate with me and some don't. And I've learned a lot from all of them. But I found very interesting in I'd say the past 20 years, certainly the past 10 years, positive psychology has developed and has, if you will, demonstrated to the scientific satisfaction of the psychological community that having a purpose in life is a different type of contentment and fulfillment, a flourishing or a thriving that goes beyond happiness. And then you can, that's not gonna, having a meaningful life is not meaning being obsessed with these, the purpose or meaning. You can take time then to enjoy yourself and to enjoy others, not always striving towards the end. But if you don't have the purpose and you're just taking time to enjoy yourself in the moment, it doesn't really work. Happiness, this kind of happiness, enjoying the moment, can occur in your quest. You can have victories, and I think you should celebrate those. You can also celebrate the process and the way it's working and enjoy that. I'll note there in England, I've done work in England, and they always take time for tea at 11 and tea at 4. And those are, and I've worked in Australia too, and those are great moments where you really enjoy the journey, you know, of pursuing your meeting with your colleagues. It's a great time. But then you can also enjoy, you know, going out to the theater and the other things that really enrich your life. And again, the focus doesn't have to be on having a purposeful life, doesn't have to be just a career, and it probably doesn't work well if it's just a career. It needs, you know, you can have purpose, multifaceted purpose with family and friends and causes. And all of those, I think, can be meaningful pursuits that really give you a contentment or fulfillment that's other than the happiness that most people, other than the diversions and entertainment that most people associate with happiness.
Thanks so much, Brian. Next, we have Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think I'll build on what Brian was talking about, that don't make happiness the goal, find happiness in the journey. And I was just thinking back to one of the Walt Disney cartoons. You know, you have to forgive me, I'm old, but I think the expression was "whistle while you work." And it goes back to the question: is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? And of course, the smart engineer says, "Well, you just got the wrong glass." But no, you have to find your happiness where you're at, and always make the best of things. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. That's a nice quote. Whistle while you work. Thanks so much. And next we have Jean.
Yeah, I think people may have different definition for happiness, because to me, happiness is not pleasure. Happiness is something, it's like when you connect, your mind, your body, and soul are in the same place. That's when you feel happiness. It's not pleasure. I think people always misuse it. And the reason we have all this moral or whatever standard, because that help us to measure what is happiness, because people have different way they feel happy, you know. That's why we have this, what Joe mentioned about, you know, you have your standard, because you have to know what is happy. You have your own standard of happiness. That's how we create this different kind of like life philosophy, whatever, because we want to set that standard, then we know when we get our happiness, what make us happy. Because life philosophy is about what's really make us feel this enlightenment or happiness, whatever. You know, I think that's why, to me, happiness can be part of the goal, because to me, it's like flow. It's part of when you find meaning in life, you feel happy. You're aligned with your meaning, or you pursue meaning. So that's what I don't quite agree with some of other people's opinion on happiness, because I wonder if we have different definition of happiness.
Thanks, Jean. That's a great way to put it. Thanks so much. And Let's tackle the last question, last important question. And actually, before we go to that, we have Shan Marie. Shan Marie.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I suspect that Jordan Peterson is possibly trying to get us to understand that not all moments in life are happy, and that we have to know how to endure them in a way that's not undermining to our character and to our family and to the relationships that we have. So I think we also have to answer that question. How do we handle our unhappiness, our legitimate unhappiness, where the situation warrants it?
Yeah, wow, that's a great angle to look at. How do we handle our unhappiness? Well, thanks so much, Shan-Marie. And sorry about that. Now let's get to a philosophical question that Kevin posed. It's, what do we lose if we don't have God? What do we lose if we don't have God? And Pegor, you can go next.
Yeah, so again, to sort of build up from my previous question answers of like the hierarchy of the thing below and the thing above, God is the thing that's the utmost above. And so God is the thing that provides unity to everything. And more importantly than unity, provides balance to everything. And so if you don't have God, then what that means is that something else, something of this world is at the top of the hierarchy. And I don't know about you, but I don't think anything of this world deserves to be of utmost, like the highest thing, because everyone or everything has a flaw in the world. And so we will be subjecting ourselves to something that is flawed in some sense. And that thing does not give us balance in what we do. And when I say balance, like I want to talk about the example of when Jesus, a lady comes up and washes Jesus's feet with a perfume, and then Judas complains that we could have sold that perfume for money to help the poor, and then Jesus says that, yeah, but it's not every day that the Son of God is with you. And so it's like that kind of balance where, like, if your entire life's purpose is all, like, if you worship the God of helping the poor, you're gonna put your life off balance, even though it seems like a virtuous thing to do. And so yeah, God is balance. Thank you.
Thanks, Pegor. Next we have Jean.
Yeah, I think God is just a symbol. I think one of the meeting they mentioned about the transcendental experience. I think that's what people need for the spiritual life. And God is just one of the channel people use to achieve that. And it just, to me, I'm not religious or believer, but I believe in transcendental experience. I believe there's something bigger than us. Like maybe it's Tao, maybe it's nature, maybe it's universe, something. So I think God is just the representative of people's transcendental experience, something bigger than themselves.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks so much. And next we have Dave and then Kevin. Dave, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Victor. From the other point of view, I claim to be agnostic. I don't know. I didn't create the universe, so I'm not going to take credit for that. But I believe everything on this earth I have to accomplish myself. If you want to pray to God or whatever, but I think if it is to be, it's up to me. That's another quote for tonight. Anyway, best wishes to all of you. It's been a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next, we have Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to bring actually Jane mentioned that, and also David put on the chat. Perhaps God is merely a symbol for authority. We need something bigger than me or ourselves, something we can solve. We need help. If we help human still not enough, we still need something invisible, even powerful. We cannot trust. Make ourselves imagination bigger. We think ourselves power. I would say could be this God. Back and it's yourself. You make yourself bigger. You think you can control. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And we had an amazing session today. We tackled some important and very interesting questions. And thank you so much. And we have Brian. Brian,
I
what do you
just
think
want to
about?
give you a chance to comment on some of these, especially the last question. Do you have any thoughts?
Me, Brian?
Yes.
Well, yeah. So with the last question, I found Pegor's answer very relatable, because I kind of think the same thing, that the idea of God is more the abstracted abstraction that we just hold in our thoughts or in our soul. And that is the best ideal. And we always have to have that to aim towards. And that's the only thing that is not corrupted. And everything else is corrupted. And in that sense, I agree with Pegor's answer, which is a very good answer. So that's my take. Thanks, Brian.
Can I ask another one? If actually I early on put a comment, I said the God don't like competition with another God. So that's mean on one side we need competition something, but seems one mountain only one tiger. You cannot get another one. Kind of serious. Thank you. Any comment about that?
Well, Kevin, let's go into that, but it's getting late for many people over here. So let's wrap up the meetup, and then let's continue our discussion so that if people want to leave, they can leave. And thank you so much, guys. It was a wonderful discussion. Actually, it's a very rich topic to handle, and we discussed about happiness, about responsibility, and especially about trust, and about lack, or what do we lose when we don't have an ideal. So these are very good topics and very interesting answers, and I noted down a lot of notes. And thank you so much. And it's been a wonderful time for me to spend with you guys. Thanks so much.
You did a wonderful job, Victor. Victor and Pegor, you guys did fantastic work in moderating, and I mean it was awesome.
Well, thank you so much, guys. And I wouldn't have been possible with every one of you. Thank you. And if anyone wants to hang out, we can hang out for a little bit, but if not, we can close it out.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, I'm sorry. I wanted to say about God, the God, I think that it works well to see things in the world as signs from God or signs of God. But who or what God is, I really don't know. And I'm suspicious of people who claim that they do know who or what God is. It's that does not work for me. Historically, I mean, it doesn't work for me personally in personal discussions with them, and I don't think it's worked it served a purpose historically, but I don't think it's really has worked well recently.
I think I can understand what your gist of what you're trying to say, because I kind of vibe with that when you talk to someone who is religious and who is talking about God, it's it always feels like they don't know what they are talking about. So yeah, that's
Well, they
my
don't admit the possibility of any other understanding. That's my experience. I mean, that's the kind of experience I'm talking about. If you don't admit the possibility of other appreciations or experiences or understandings of God, I just, to me, that's a very frightening proposal from this person. And I really am skeptical about any other thing they might say on that basis.
Yeah, I found most interesting thing is, even in the Christian itself, they think the other group is not the right one. So I found it's pretty funny because we visit a friend, my husband's friend. And so my husband was trying to explore religion and talk with, and so he baptized with one of the group, but I don't think he's a real Christian because then he said, oh, the God we believe are different. So from the other group, he's trying to learn, he talked with his friend in California. He said, oh, that church, you cannot go there. They're dangerous. It just cracked me up. It's like even the believers, they fighting with each other, it's kind of funny. What about the people who have very different religion? I just found a lot of them very close-minded. They don't open to, like Brian said, not open to other possibilities,
Because I had the same experience as Jane. Yes, so like my neighbor's religion. Yeah, I've been to that church. I don't like another church because they like bad people. Why? It's making me give me a shock. By the way, I don't have a challenge